Hatem Bazian joins us from California. He's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Professor, good to have you with us on the program. We've seen these protests going on now for a week, and as you know, many of them have turned violent. Have we reached a breaking point in America when it comes to race relations?
I think if any observer of what has been taking place in the U.S., not only from this incident, but for a long period of time, would come to the conclusion that we have a tale of two cities, in essence. You have some who are flying above the clouds financially, economically, in all indications. So if you are watching Wall Street, you think that this is the best of time. But if you're watching minorities, in particular African Americans, we're seeing devastation, failed economies, in essence, some have described the United States of being a failed state that has many billionaires living in it. And as such, it was not surprising post-COVID-19, where 60% of those who have died, as well as those who ended up being for a prolonged time on ventilators, were African Americans and minorities. So this incident of George Floyd is coming at the top of a devastation that has been present and visible within the underbelly of the United States. And I think right now people are asking for really some serious examination of the policies, both political, economic, social, that are at the foundation of America. In addition, the past few years of Trump has been a visible shift on any type of reconciliation, any type of addressing the racial issues, the economic disparities. And the president, time and time again, have nodded to the white supremacists, the white nationalists, and he bear the responsibility for what we're seeing on the streets today.
Right. I do want to ask you about how Trump is handling all this and the message that he's sending. One, he's calling these violent protests domestic terrorism, and then he also had a phone conversation with many of the country's governors telling them to be more heavy-handed, and if they're not, he will send in the military. What message is this sending to the country, and in particular to these protesters who are, fed up, not the violence, but the people who are out on the street peacefully protesting?
Well, Trump called white nationalists, KKK, racists as good people, but never misses an opportunity to call minorities, African Americans, thugs. He is trying to demonstrate his strength, but yesterday he actually went under the White House in the bunker. Trump has one issue, and one issue only, that he's focusing on, his re-election campaign in November. And if he could sell and stoke the nation to racial conflict and stoke the streets in such a way that he would be the gainer, he will do that. He is speaking only to his base, and he thinks that his base will deliver for him the White House in November. So trying to demonstrate strength and trying to call for military is the classical Trump. Failed policies, failed engagement, have inability to have empathy, to bring the country together, and therefore he resorts to all this governing by Twitter and governing by stoking his base. And I think this is what we are seeing as we speak. It's total failure of leadership, failure of empathy, failure on every measure relative to leadership.
Right, but we have seen systemic racism in America for decades, going back to 1992 and the riots in LA over the acquittal of 3 white police officers in the beating of Rodney King. Many people thought that would be a tipping point, but here we are almost 30 years later. Has anything changed in America since then?
Sadly, I would have to say that work on racism and on addressing racial inequality has always been put on the back burner. In addition, that I would say since the Reagan era, there's been a steady shift to the right, where also the Democratic Party itself embraced the shift to the right. which means that minorities, the right of African Americans, addressing racial inequality, economic inequality has been set aside. So much so that we say that we have a two-party system, but it's the same side of the coin if you flip it. And as such, it's not surprising to see that this mass uprising that is taking place nationally at a moment where the country itself is split on a variety of issues, first and foremost of how to move together as a society. So the Rodney King incidents of the 90s have not shifted, and if anything, there's been intensification of criminalization of African Americans, criminalizations of the poor, criminalization of the immigrants, and it seems that unless we take seriously the needed reform in policing, constituting civilian oversight board, making sure that the cameras of the police inside the car is looking inward, because one of the most dangerous periods for an African American being arrested is when he is put in the back of the car and beaten up. And by the time he arrives at the precinct, he is already blooded. Okay. And usually they write that he resisted arrest. So all these reforms have to be put in place. But unfortunately, I would say that the political leadership in this country is still not serious. And the hope that as we are witnessing and seeing the 40 cities up in the really burning, the only time since the assassination of MLK, Martin Luther King, that we see this type of response taking place in this country. And I think what we need is a serious reconsideration of policing, that the police should serve and protect rather than beat and kill in front of us in the streets. And I think this is the moment that we are trying and calling for some serious and fundamental change in those relationships.
All right, a lot of work to do. Thank you so much, Professor Hatem Bazian.